You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas.
Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
And we are honored to be joined today by Denise and Aaron Quinn, authors of the book Victim F and stars of the Netflix series American Nightmare. Denise and Aaron, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So we were so thrilled to get to meet you at CrimeCon. We are just big fans of both of you, and we are, I would say, both of us really honored to know you. The fact that you're willing to take the time for us today, we really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, of course.
We know that there are going to be our listeners who are not familiar with your case, and rather than have you rehash all of the very complex and I'm sure quite traumatizing events behind it, we're at the top of this episode going to direct our listeners to your book, Victim F, which was co-written with Nicole Egan, and the Netflix documentary, which is based on that book, called American Nightmare. We want to start by asking you, rather than going through the case, we do want to start by asking, talk a little bit about the experience of writing the book and what was that like for both of you?
Yeah, it was really a mix of emotions. We very early on had more or less the truth of our story hijacked, first initially by the police saying that it was all a hoax, and then through the media, they mislabeled me the real life Gone Girl. And even after my captor and rapist was caught, there was still misinformation perpetuated by the law enforcement that it was really frustrating to sit back silently and watch as the world had conversations and judgments about the worst moments of your life. And you just couldn't say anything because you didn't want to negatively impact the court process or him being sentenced fully. Even in that time of silence, we wrote. I think just in general, it's really healing to get something like that down on paper to process. Because living through it moment to moment, you're just surviving. So it's helpful to be able to revisit in a safe place and really try to figure out what you were thinking and feeling in those moments. A lot of it can be quite validating, revisiting and really giving a space to understand the decisions that you made. And because there's a lot of self-blame and self-doubt that can happen when you go through something like this. Yeah, and of course, to go back to those moments can be re-traumatizing. You feel the terror of those very life or death traumatizing situations. Again, it's healing to be able to revisit and reprocess it and really get a voice again.
I think it was important for us to have it from both our points of view. So the book alternates between chapter from my point of view and then Denise's. I think people generally understood what Denise went through was absolutely horrible, and you can have some imagination of what that would be like. But what many people didn't know is what the police were doing to me during this exact same time, where people understood that they came out, called it a hoax, but actually the whole time they were telling me I had murdered Denise and that this was all made up. So they didn't believe it from the get-go. And we wanted to, as best we could, put people in our shoes and have people wonder, what would I do if I was in this situation? And how do you handle the machinery of law enforcement, the media, social media, all just piling on you? And that's almost insurmountable task to get through. And that's, in a way, was challenging to write, therapeutic in some ways. When I generally felt like if I read part of my chapter and I felt a little sick, then I was probably on the right track.
This has to be incredibly difficult, not just the experience, but I wanted to roll back to when you all started talking about we should write a book. After all you'd already been through, does one person turn to another and say, we should write a book about our experiences? Or how did that kind of bubble up?
I think having the truth of something this horrifying be told through other people's mouths, lenses, narratives, cut and edited to whatever version that they want to give. I think we talked about it early on. Like, if we are ever going to do something, we need to write a book so we can put the full truth out there. Because if we do anything on film, it's going to be edited through the lens of, and even with the Netflix series that came out, and we worked really closely with the team to make sure that the overall bigger picture themes were addressed, and it wasn't just the sensationalism of the crime itself. But even then, it's still edited in a way with that true crime genre and sensational, because it needs to be entertaining for people to keep clicking, binging through. That was our ultimate goal. If we're ever going to really share this, then we want to be able to put it down through our voices, through our perspective. Because that was another thing that we saw. We started paying attention to quote unquote true crime, and we saw a lot of it being focused on the perpetrator and kind of glorifying and sensationalizing that, what makes them tick and all of that. And victims were an afterthought. And just throughout our entire experience, even through the court process, even after the truth was out, the revictimization that we face, I don't think the public really understands fully what it's like to be a victim throughout the whole thing. It doesn't just end when the crime is over. It's a lifetime that you have to navigate. We talked about it early on. It's interesting because we even consulted with some publishers and literary agents, and we got a lot of, what you went through was pretty bad, but no one's going to want to read a book about it. And we're like, really? Okay. So we didn't accept that, and we waited and were patient and kept true to ourselves. And eventually we found the right publisher and co-author to work with.
Yeah, how did you meet Nicole Egan? That was going to be our next question. She is a absolutely wonderful, delightful person. So did you find her, or did she find you? Or was it a little bit of both?
We had the same literary agent at the time. That's how we got connected. She had just written her book, Chasing Cosby, because she had followed the Cosby survivors for, over a decade or more. And so she was, focused on the victims and really focused on wanting to get the truth. That was the thing for us too. We wanted to make sure everything was truthful and factual as possible. And we had a different author we were initially working with that really wanted to make it into a psychological thriller and get Mueller a voice and a perspective. And it was like, whoa, no, this is not what our goals are. We don't want to feed into that. And so it was really helpful to work with Nikki. She has put any ego aside and really we all agreed that it should be told from our perspectives. Within the process, we realized that Aaron and I should write our own parts, and then she really helped us edit. We're not technical writers. We absolutely needed her to help guide and shape the book. And then she did the third person parts of the book. So it was really nice because you got our perspectives. We're living through our own kind of story side by side. And then she interviewed family members and our attorneys, and then through media reports and court documents, pulled in perspectives of law enforcement. So you really do get like a full bird's eye view of everything that happened in our book.
So you really get three perspectives, if you will. Denise, Aaron, and then also Nikki's point of view as I don't think she'd be offended if I said outsider, because she is able to step in with a fresh perspective. Both of us were just making a horrible face when you mentioned this other writer you were considering working with, and the idea that you're going to give the offender a voice. That's just grotesque. And you're absolutely right. As much as both of us love true crime, Kristin and Bill, and Kristin is an avid reader, the endless fascination and discussion of offenders, it's beyond eye-rolling. That's not the only compelling narrative in true crime, and yet people seem to be wanting to talk about offenders, serial killers, what have you, endlessly. How did you feel like you were able to push back against that?
A lot of fighting. No, I mean, I laugh. No, I mean, it was a long journey to get the right people. And even then, there's a lot of hiring and firing and trial and error of entering a contract, having to get out of a contract because people tell you what you want to hear. But then when push comes to shove and the work is actually being done, and you're like, oh my God, you're doing the thing again. And a big piece of our case was that type of viewpoint, that sensationalism around a real crime, whereas like sometimes quote unquote true crime isn't really true. It's spun, it's dramatized. And part of that fed into the whole Gone Girl thing and viewing me a certain way, not understanding how real victims respond in these types of situations. And quite frankly, it seemed like law enforcement got a lot of their training, quote unquote, from fiction and from these types of sensationalized stories. So we absolutely didn't want to participate in that. We didn't want to feed into it. And we did get some talk with different publishers who were like, what about giving the detective a point of view? And we're like, which like Misty, yeah, she's great, but she doesn't come in till the end.
Right.
A lot of it, as victims, you have to self-advocate and fight these battles on your own or with our hired attorneys or with our family members. And so it was really important for us to show the realness of all of that.
And it's important. Like, we're both physical therapists. We're at the time when we started writing the book, we're in our early 30s. We have careers that we could go back to. And so we're able to, in a way, if we couldn't find the right partners to help us, we could just step away. And that's a big part of it. That would be disappointing. We knew that either we do something that means that's important to us, that will mean look at bigger pictures, like how the police handle cases or how the media handles cases, and not focus on the perpetrator. Either we do that or we do nothing. And we had to accept that. And that's sometimes people don't have maybe that avenue. Often true crime victims are younger and maybe they need the money from one of these projects, even though it's frankly, that doesn't matter. It's not that much, but they may need it. We could go to our careers and our families and walk away from it if we needed to. So that was put us in a unique position to find the right people. And it took a lot.
A lot of trial and error.
So the idea of we don't need this and we can walk, it sounds like that might have increased your leverage from time to time when you needed it.
Probably. Maybe more so for ourselves, like emotionally. So I think sometimes we did take a step back. In the same vein, we started working with a different production company, and and as things were moving, it wasn't right, and we fought to get out of that contract. And then we're really being courted by Raw, the production company that did American Nightmare, for a year and a half. They kept checking in, and then we made them write out full outlines of what their goals were. And we were very cautious and very making sure that they're on the same page. So I think for our emotional stamina really to deal with entering in these types of projects, that helped, knowing, okay, we have each other, we've got our jobs, we have our family. If we don't do this, if it doesn't work out, then that's fine. If we're gonna do it, it has to be right and hold true to our values. And it's a long road.
Bill and I have been on the other end of the documentary making process as well. And we know that it is exhausting. It's frustrating. It can be like banging your head on the wall, just trying to get across the point of view that you want to have conveyed. How was making the documentary for you when you found the right production company? Was it another sort of aspect of getting your voice back and owning your story? Or did it become something that was like, it's so re-traumatizing because I have to tell it again and again?
Yeah, a little bit of both. Yeah, definitely. Do you want to start?
Oh, it's when you're doing the interviews, it's quite challenging because one, you're doing reviews all day. So you're in front of cameras with lights and stuff that we're not used to. And we're doing multiple days of 8 hours on camera going through everything. And so that just the logistics of that is challenging. And then also you have to be able to tell it in the moment with as much emotion as you're experiencing at the time. And that's understandable because you want people to try to feel what you're going through. That's not generally how we deal with it in a day-to-day. You don't I can revisit it, but we have to relive it. After doing my first round of interviews, like it probably messed me up for a couple of weeks to where I felt like restabilized from it, because it was like the worst time of my life. So there was that point, but also the reception from the series. And when we saw the final edit, we know that they hit the major points that we're hoping they would get. And they did stay very victim centric, and Mulder's basically an afterthought, which is we appreciated. And the amount of people have reached out to us from literally across the world and had this touch them, and that makes it worth it, because people's minds are changed through their hearts, not necessarily through statistics. And so hopefully, if even we've had law enforcement reach out and say like how they were frustrated by how the FBI and Vallejo handled it, or officers who are hopefully remember the story, so that if they run across quote unquote bizarre case, that they maybe pause and say, hey, I should step back and not run with emotion and not bury the victims or bury the person in front of me just because they are in front of me. And that's why we did it. So yeah, there's a good and bad with both.
I was rewatching it the other night and getting ready to interview the two of you, and it looks so emotionally devastating sometimes. It is, I can't watch it without crying. I can't imagine what it must have been like for the two of you on the day. So when I say that you're incredibly brave to be willing to go through it, I mean it from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you. Yeah, I was for that first round of interviews. So it's the second episode, and I'm talking about captivity. I was 7 months pregnant with our second. And there were some parts I was retelling, and the directors were like, you're a little detached as you say it. And I'm like, I was detached at this point. That's how I got through captivity. I get that. But as a viewer, if you're detached, they'll turn the channel. And okay. And I wanted to be as real as possible. And so I really did try to pull myself back into that place, because I want to share all the aspects of being in that situation. But I just remember at one point taking a break and thinking, what the am I doing? I'm 7 months pregnant. Am I traumatizing my baby? Like, why am I even doing this? It's just this, is this even safe? All the things. And then I remember going into the back, and this one woman who worked on the set, she just was like, I just want to thank you for sharing and for all that you're doing. And she shared her experience of assault with me. And right there, I was like, no, I'm doing this for a reason, and it's important, and I'm going to be fine. My baby's going to be fine. Like, it's worth it. Because there is a bigger message. And this is, again, like our experience of the kidnapping and the details of it. Yes, they're extreme and they're sensational and all these crazy things, but the true heart of being a victim of a violent crime, a human being going through trauma, anyone can connect with different aspects of it. And so that's why it was just really important to us. As physical therapists, we deal with people overcoming trauma on a daily basis. And so we wanted to be able to use our experience in a way that maybe can touch people, connect with people, and hopefully in the bigger picture, lead to some changes that need to happen.
Oh, without question. It's an amazing story. And I know you've heard this, but it's important, I think, for us to say this. It really does take a significant amount of bravery on both your parts to just say, we're going to do this and we're going to tell this story. Talk to us about the book, your collaborative process. How did it come about where each person was writing their own sections? Did that just develop organically?
Yes and no. Again, there was like things that I remember writing just right after the kidnapping, especially of the home invasion and the first couple of days of during captivity, mainly because we were preparing to be prosecuted. So I was just trying to get as much of everything down on paper as possible. So we already had those types of things. We had our own notes preparing for court. And then in our fantasy of one day, if we get to share our full story, maybe this is how we'd lay it out. And we were like sitting at a brewery and writing on a napkin of this is how we'd organize it, not even knowing if it'd really go anywhere. But again, in a way, it's just like us organizing the chaos of this whole traumatic event. And then as we were working with Nikki, we were trying to figure that out. So she'd interview us and try to write what we interviewed, but it was challenging. She's not just trying to rewrite one person's perspective, but a male and female's separate perspectives and give us our own voices. And so we discovered that I think it just was easiest if we wrote it out and then she could ask us questions, which was really helpful. Okay, we don't need as much detail on this, but can you pull in more of what you were feeling here? So we got our flow and it became a fluid thing where we were both, or all of us were doing our own thing, but then we'd come together and it really was collaborative.
To Nikki, her passion to help victims, and I know she still has relationships with some of the Cosby survivors, and she recognized that it was like important for us to write sections for, and then she has helped amplify and edit, and Denise to say ask the next question or the follow-up question that using her background as a journalist, and so then we can get into like deeper levels of it, and that was a major help and really just shows to her character of what she's passionate about and what she cares about, which I think only made the book better.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. It sounds like you almost got to have a master class in writing by working with Nikki, because she is such an excellent journalist and such a wonderful writer. And as you said, Aaron, a really strong advocate for victims. That had to have been amazing. And so you appeared with Nikki at CrimeCon this past year. CrimeCon's an experience all on its own, but adding to it the fact that you guys are authors and you had this documentary come out, and you're also, again, dealing with this. You are victims of crime. What was CrimeCon like for you guys?
So this year was our second CrimeCon. Mm-hmm. Our first one we did right after the book was released in 2021. And Nikki had done one, I think, the year before for Chasing Cosby with the Cosby survivors. And when she proposed us, hey, do you want to do this thing? And I was like, excuse me, what CrimeCon? What is it? They really got a con for everything, don't they? Okay, let's try this out. And in 2021, it was still pandemic-ish. So It wasn't as big, but still we spoke in front of, I think, like 500 people. And that was huge for us. That was scary. And we're not public speakers. So it was, very intimidating. And then this year we spoke in a ballroom that held 3,500 people.
Yeah, it was massive.
It was crazy.
And so it was a whole different ballgame. An entire resort was CrimeCon fans. It was just, So we were walking through to get to our room and you have people like, hey, and you're like, oh, wow, people know who we are. This is strange. And it was all a lot to process, but overall very positive. Everyone was so gracious, so respectful. And speaking in a room of that many people, you feel everyone's connection and energy. And so it was really nice to make jokes and show our personality a little bit more and have people respond and laugh and gasp and in real time. So it was unique. It was really cool.
So you felt well treated by the audience. You felt like they were supportive of the two of you as survivors?
We did.
100%. Yeah, there was. American Nightmare obviously did quite well on Netflix. I think it was number one after its first day. In our hometown, people recognize us, and sometimes people will come up. But at CrimeCon, you know that probably everyone watched it. If they're going to CrimeCon, they probably watched the biggest true crime documentary of the year at the point. It's a little overwhelming, but then most people, if they came up, they're just really nice and supportive. But it's strange to just like walk through a lobby and it took a half an hour to get to our one day because people were but everyone was really nice and play. It was just you're like, oh yeah, this show is big. Like that, it's hard to wrap your head around when you see whatever millions of views or something. But you're like, oh this is that show struck a chord with the audience.
And also being able to meet other survivors and people who we look up to, and to meet them in person and hear that they look up to us. It was just like, what? You wait. So it was really, a very unique and empowering situation, because you really did feel like you're coming together for a common goal. And that was special.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder. Before we get back to the podcast, just wanted to remind you that we have a GoFundMe effort going on right now. This campaign is designed to help us raise funds to help promote Mind Over Murder and specifically to push the Colonial Parkway Murders investigation forward. We'd love it if you could support us in any way that you can. Any donation from $5 to whatever you can afford is very much appreciated and will be incredibly helpful. The link is in the show notes and in our social media pages. As always, thanks for your support. Now back to Mind Over Murder.
You do get a whole mutual admiration society at CrimeCon. And I had told Bill as soon as I arrived, I said, I have to meet Denise and Aaron. This is non-negotiable. I have to find them at some point or another. And luckily, Nikki texted me and was like, okay, I have them come find them. But it was definitely one of our highlights was being able to spend time with you both and get to talk to you about these sorts of the kind of sticky issues that come up with crime. True crime it's as much entertainment as anything else. And I think that's a little hard to deal with when you're a victim of crime.
Yeah, I think there's ways to do true crime that I would say is more ethical or more valuable. And then there's the ways where it's a little
exploitive.
And taking advantage of people's suffering. And at least our experience at CrimeCon, that most people were interested in the human aspect and about the victims and about the suffering, not only just, not just us, but like our families. And there's a whole ripple effect. And that should never be taken lightly or ignored.
Well, I think both Victim F and American Nightmare are ultimately a survivor's story. The two of you getting through this experience. And we've talked about it on Mind Over Murder before, the idea that life goes on and that you are able to move your life forward and focus on the many positive things in our lives. This ethics in true crime topic has actually been very prevalent in the last couple of years at CrimeCon and other conferences we've attended.
I think it should be. I feel like maybe 5-7 years ago, almost all the true crime stuff, as we allude to, was about the perpetrators, or like there still is that, but there was like the Ted Bundy tapes, there was a show Dahmer. There's still going to be a fascination with people who act so outside the norm of society. The reality is most of the victims of true crime are just typical people and going through extraordinary things. And the idea that we'll understand what makes the perpetrators tick is probably not possible because things are too complex. And so spending time there just to me isn't that appealing. I'd rather hear about people overcoming adversity and moving forward.
One of the things that you alluded to earlier, Denise, is the fact that victims of crime are not just victimized one time when the thing actually happens. It happens again as you make a trip through the legal system and through the court system. And every time thereafter that you have to speak about it. As Aaron had said earlier, you are both victims in this case, both of Mueller and also of the detectives at Vallejo PD who did not take your case seriously. How have you dealt with the trauma that comes with those two events? And what tips do you have for people who also are dealing with trauma from the legal system and from law enforcement?
I think the biggest thing is just number one, to always believe in yourself. And that's hard to do, especially when you're being gaslit over and over again by people who are in a position of power, authority, and who are supposedly supposed to be the trained professionals. As we experienced in our case, there's nothing professional about most of what they did. Yeah, so it's hard because, again, when you go through a crime, you can't help but overanalyze what you did, what you could have done, and everything we did and how we acted as victims was used against us. So it's hard. It can become a really dark place. And that's where having our support system was really helpful. We were lucky to have each other and stay by each other's sides. We never blamed one another for anything. And we were able to really either one of us would be the strong one picking the other one up, or we both were okay, we're got to call it a night and we're just going to sit on the couch and do nothing. But then once we get the energy, okay, then let's keep fighting, let's moving forward. Hearing other survivors speak out was a really powerful thing for us too. Just seeing, okay, it is possible, we can do it, they're doing it, how much it's helping us to do it. Maybe we can help other people if we speak out. So really trying to stay to the truth of what you're lived experiences. And then all the little things in life, like finding gratitude and going to therapy. You need help, and it's okay to ask for help. That's really a big thing, in any capacity, whether it's just, can you make me dinner tonight? Just, those are just a few things off the top of my head.
Yeah. And with law enforcement, number one thing is get a lawyer. Regardless of what happened, you just need an attorney. You need a ref in the room, and they will manipulate, and they know the rules, and you don't. And I made the mistake of having the innocence mindset. Like, they will follow the facts, and law enforcement is human, and they have biases. They have confirmation bias, tunnel vision. It's not just, in our case, when it's just Vallejo, it's the FBI. It's the countless supervisors who looked at this case and didn't take a step back. So you need an attorney there so that you have at least someone in your corner who will actually let you know what the rules are. Because even like the Miranda rights have been dwindled down through the courts over the years. You think there's court protections, there's not protections. So you need an attorney. And the other thing is with law enforcement, ask questions, don't accept. They're like, if they say this is how things done, ask why. If they can't explain, then you ask again and you ask again, because they should be able to explain it. And unfortunately, it's not like any other profession. Say you need a plumber to come to your house, you can shop around and find the best plumber. You're going to be stuck with this law enforcement. They get assigned to you. You can't get rid of them even when they have conflicts of interest. So then you need to actually ask questions and document what they're answering and treat it as if you could fire them if you're able to, because we got told this is how things are done, and then you find out no, this is one. If this is how things are done, then you need to fucking upgrade. Or two, they're going like, this is not how things are done, and that's probably the one of the best things to do. So you just can't inherently trust them, because people make mistakes. Even if the law enforcement officers are trying to do their best, which most of them are trying to do their best, they make mistakes, and you just can't accept their version. Otherwise, you'll get railroaded.
And one of the biggest advantages we had was to be able to consult with Aaron's brother, who's an FBI agent. Like, how many people have a family member who is in the FBI? And we talked to him endlessly about certain things. And he's, no, it shouldn't have been done this way. Or this is how some investigators are trained to interrogate. And so we learned a lot through him and learned what questions to ask, because it's a really convoluted and tricky system to go up against.
What message do you have for anyone in law enforcement who is inclined to look at crime victims with skepticism and hostility, other than the obvious string of obscenities that I would shout if it were me?
I think they need to educate themselves on how interrogations have been historically done in America, and they should read about that and not ignore scholars on this. Sometimes it seems that law enforcement goes, well, those are the academics, we don't really need to listen to them because they're not doing the job day in, day out.
Or the psychologist. Oh, that's a psychologist's job. You're like, if you're dealing with human beings on a daily basis, especially going through extreme, extraordinary, traumatic events, then you should have a little understanding baseline of psychology and how people going through trauma act and behave and feel.
It's a complex problem. It's really hard to solve crimes. And they deal with people going through the worst times of their lives. They deal with people lying to them. So there's ways to be skewed and have their perspectives shifted because of the job they do. I don't envy that job. It's very difficult. Like every profession, if they're going to move forward, they should learn from other professions. So we work in the medical field. Like I want to listen to researchers. I want to listen to psychologists because they can give insight and help me do my job better. You can't be everything at once, and understanding that confirmation bias is a thing, understand that tunnel vision is a thing. We have our own implicit biases. Like, how do you set the system to reduce the impact of those, which there are systems out there? That's what I would want them to do, is just learn and not try to silo themselves off by thinking it's like us versus them. And probably the biggest thing is that they're part of the community. They are paid by the public. They are public servants. And so they should kind of try to view themselves more as guardians than warriors. And unfortunately, again, there's very dangerous situations they're in, but most of the time they need to act more as guardians. And we've, fortunately, since American Nightmare, I've been able to speak to different groups of law enforcement. There are plenty of officers out there who know that there's better ways to do this. And not only just are more effective ways of questioning, there's more effective ways to get to solve problems. And so it's not even even just about like traditional training. It's actually just improving how you do your job.
How would you contrast the work done in your case in terms of the Vallejo, California Police Department and the FBI in terms of what's your takeaway now with it? Several years have gone by and life has moved on, but you've probably had a chance to think about this a bit. What's your take on the agencies that were involved?
They have, particularly Vallejo, has a culture that does not care about accountability for their officers. And I don't say that lightly. They do not care as a whole to hold their officers to account. This is a department that group of their officers bend the tips of their badges to celebrate killings in the line of duty, and none of those officers have been punished. Detective Mustard on our case lied on sworn statements in our civil case, has withheld evidence in other cases, destroyed evidence in other cases and these are the things we know about. He's going to retire with full benefits. He was promoted. They actually lowered the standards to promote him. So it's a culture that cares about protecting themselves over protecting society or the public. With the FBI, we're fortunate. I know my brother. I know a lot of his colleagues. I know the FBI can do amazing work. And in this case, they decided to, I really blame the supervisors, not only just Agent Sesma, but the supervisors who knew that Agent Sesma had a conflict of interest and kept him on the case. And we have found out he's been promoted as well. And so it's hard to answer that question because they didn't show accountability. They didn't make changes. They didn't do anything. They just said it was a crazy case. No one could solve it. So therefore, it's okay what happened. When the reality is this case was actually should have been solved in the first day if they just followed basic evidence.
Mm-hmm. Wow. As survivors of a very high profile crime, you clearly have had to develop some survival strategies to get through the last 10 years or so. You've talked to us some about your best practices for dealing with law enforcement. Talk a little bit about what are your survival strategies for dealing with the news media and social media, especially because social media is just so invasive.
Yeah. We really stayed away from social media for most of this time. I just only got an Instagram account in 2021 when we released the book. And even then, I wasn't really active on it. Of course, with the Netflix series and people across the world watching, there's a lot more exposure. I did battle with, before the show coming out, what do I do? Do I become private? How do I navigate this? Do I want to hide, considering how bad it was in the past with people reaching out on social media? But ultimately, our goal is to continue this conversation. It's to speak in front of law enforcement. It's to advocate and meet other survivors or influential people that could help us possibly make change. So ultimately, I decided, okay, I'm going to be public and I'm just going to try to not let some of the comments get to me. Thankfully, overwhelmingly, it was very positive. And there's still people who are just awful. That's where therapy comes in. I've been in and out. There's points of stability. I've tried a number of different types of therapy. After American Nightmare coming out, I just, for the first time, did EMDR.
Okay.
What's that?
I don't know what that is.
It's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR. So in short, the therapist can guide the patient through bilateral alternating movements, either by lateral eye movements or by bilateral tapping. It's supposed to simulate the REM cycle of sleep, which is where they believe that the deep memories are being processed. And with a traumatic memory, it's like an injury to the brain. It doesn't get processed properly. So they're trying to allow you to go back to that really traumatic memory and process it in a safer place. And for me, at first, it was difficult moments because I built up so many barriers around those memories. So I actually did it assisted with ketamine. That really allows you to go deeper into the brain and open up some of the confinements of reality. And it strips away some of those barriers and allows you to really process it in a deep way. And I haven't felt so good since this whole thing has happened. I really do feel like some of those memories are fully processed. And the biggest things that I found is my physical self. I'm not as sick and anxious and just really like in a trauma state. So that's been really helpful. But also other things were super helpful too. Regular talk therapy at first, just having a space to be able to say what happened and have someone listen. And then just by talking can help you process through it. I tried neurofeedback training, which is you trying to retrain the wavelengths in the brain and certain areas of the brain, trying to get you into a calmer state because you've basically trained yourself to be hypervigilant and just always on all the time. And that's not sustainable long term. And exhaustion was a big symptom of mine, just feeling exhausted all the time. So it's nice to finally feel like I've got my energy back that allows me to feel like I have the capability to keep fighting, keep moving forward. So again, it's like a trial and error. Does this work? Okay, this isn't working, or this did work for this period of time, but now maybe I could try something new and something different. And continuing to talk and be vulnerable and open up with people, you learn what their strategies are, and it helps you learn and grow.
And as far as like the media, if anyone in the media says you need to tell this now or no one's going to listen, and they try to put you on some sort of arbitrary deadline, just ignore them and never work with that person. We got that a lot early on. If you don't tell it now, no one's going to listen to it. If you don't tell it now, no one's going to listen to it. And then years later, we had people saying, if you don't tell it now, no one's going to listen. I'm like, this is strange. It's been 7 years and you're still saying the exact same thing. I think people are going to listen to it. And it doesn't matter because you don't want to be in that pressured situation. If someone's doing that, you know that they're looking to try to capture a deadline for their job, not necessarily worrying about your healing or how you feel in that moment. So the journalists and podcasters who care will go, hey, on your schedule, we'll figure it out. Like you two did, where we've been trying to do this interview for, I don't know, 9 months or something. So you're very patient. Like that. Yeah. And that's the people who care will go, they understand that life happens or that you need more time processing and they're not trying to push you into. So if you're a victim and you feel pushed by someone in the media, then that's exactly what they're trying to do. And that's not going to be healthy for you. Anytime that we've even gone down that road, that's when we've had to reverse and try to dig our way out. And that's really hard to do. So it's just better never to go that route.
Yeah, really listen to your gut. We've had situations where we're like, oh, I don't know if this feels right. And then we enter it and we're like, yeah, no, it's not right. And we just got to a point, you go through enough, okay, whoops, we shouldn't have done that, to go, you know what? Trust in yourself. If it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't align with your goals and your values, then you don't need it. You don't need any of it, but everyone's in that profession to sell themselves. I'm the person that you need to talk to. I'm the person that's going to get you there. And it's not about you. It's about them. It's a hard road to navigate.
When you go out and speak to law enforcement agencies, are they open to this? Obviously, the book and the series and your public comments, including today, are often extremely critical because you're highlighting all of, or at least some of the problems that you encountered as initially crime victims and then trying to move your life forward and put it all back together. How does it go over with our friends in law enforcement when you're talking about your experiences?
Well, I'm going to say jokingly, I don't think we're critical. I think we're being honest.
Okay.
I agree with you.
No, the groups of law enforcement that we've spoken in front of, they're already on the right side in a way that they're asking us to come speak. They already want to hear and have the intention of learning and growing. There might be some people in the audience, I don't know if they're like forced to go by their superiors but most of the time it seems overall, the feeling in the room is people really do genuinely care and they want to learn. We did our first one we did back in March. Misty, the detective who linked the cases, she was there with us and she spoke a little bit. And at the end of it, she had said that one of the officers came up to her and had admitted to her, you know what, I was a mustard. And then I saw that show and I realized, oh my God, I need to change. And Misty was like, oh my God, I can't believe you admitted that to me. But that's huge. Even if they're there unwillingly and are coming from a critical standpoint as far as not really trusting us, they're going to listen, and either they change, they don't change, they're open to it. Really, we want people who need to change to hear us out. And also to the organizers of these events, obviously they care. So we feel protected. We don't feel like we're going to be attacked. And even if someone did, I feel like we would be supported. Again, it's overall been very positive, and it's been encouraging to connect with people in a position of power who are really crusading to make change.
Yeah, where it's going to really change is at the grassroots level. Use Mustard's example, but Mustard was trained a certain way. He was mentored in a certain way. Unfortunately, he's probably mentored people in a particular way. So if we can get supervisors and people to say, hey, there's another choice here, there's more options here. We understand it's a really hard job. No one's expecting police to be infallible. We don't either. In the medical world, we used to do lobotomies. We don't do those anymore because they don't work. Mm-hmm. So part of growing as a profession is to hear from victims, and often law enforcement has an interaction with someone, never hears from that person again because of the nature of how the legal system works. So to hear from us and knowing that a lot of them maybe only watch American Nightmare and don't know that my brother is an FBI special agent. He's also a lieutenant colonel in the Army. So it's not that we're anti-law enforcement. It's not us versus them. It's just about trying to help and upgrade. And that's why we go and speak, is that we're there to provide our perspective and what we have learned over the years. And hopefully that can help them in future cases.
Yeah, we want to work with law enforcement, not against law enforcement. And being in the medical field, like, we have that experience. We are doing what we were trained to do based on our education. And sometimes we make the wrong choices in any profession. Really, you need to take accountability and understand what mistakes you made and then go, okay, how do we learn from this? Because again, we're dealing with human beings here. I think that should be a big priority is, okay, how can I improve?
I think that is an excellent note to end on. The book is Victim F. The documentary is American Nightmare. And you two are some of the bravest people I've ever met. It is an honor to have you with us today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It was so great talking to you guys.
That is going to do it for this episode of Mind Over Murder. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawl Space Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.